Hello again. In this video we'll add some more programming constructs that will make our code much more interesting. We're going to talk about branching statements that allow us to change, or rather branch, the code's execution based on the evaluation of an expression. And we learned about expressions in the previous lesson. There are two Visual Basic branching statements, the if-then statement and the select case statement. Next, we're going to talk about arrays for collecting and managing groups of data, and we'll use that as a springboard to look at recursion statements. Recursion statements, also known in other programming languages as iteration statements, allow us to loop through each item in a group of data. We could change each item in the array, or evaluate it, or a number of different things depending on what we need for our application to do. The three iteration statements that we're going to look at are the for each, the for next, and the do while loop statements. And then finally we're going to tie all three concepts together with a real life scenario to give you some context for why this stuff is so important. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken the liberty of creating a new project called Lesson5, and on the single Form 1 that I have in my project, I've added a combo box, a list box, a text box, and a button. And in the combo box, what I've done was added items, Bob, Beth, Conrad, and Grant. And in my list box, I've added the items, as you can see, foobar, Baz, Quirk, widgets, and gadgets. Okay? And we'll use this as the basis for the rest of our examples that we're going to use in this lesson. And let's first of all talk about the if statement, or the if-then statement. The if-then statement is the first of the branching statements that we'll talk about, and as I said in the introduction, the branching statements allow you to decide whether or not to execute a block of code based on the evaluation of an expression. So let's dive into some code, and we're going to just paste some code that I've written here a little bit earlier so you can see what I mean by the statement that I just made. Here we have example 1. In line 7, I have if combo box 1.text equal Bob, then we're going to pop up a message box that says you picked Bob, and then we're going to set the combo box text property back equal to an empty string. So you can see the syntax for the if-then statement. In fact, the if-then is encoded in blue text, so those are keywords in Visual Basic. And then at the very end of our if statement, we have the end if statement in line 10. And everything in between the if and the end if will execute if our expression combo box 1.text equals Bob equates to true. If it equates to false, then it will not execute these two lines of code, lines 8 and 9. It'll just skip over those. Okay, so let's run our application. Test this out real quickly. You can see this in action. I'm going to select Beth, and when I click the button, nothing happens. When I click Bob and click the button, then you can see I get the message box, you picked Bob. So you can see how I'm able to branch the code execution by skipping over blocks of code or executing blocks of code based on the expression between the if and the then statements. Or rather, I'm sorry, the if or then keywords. Alright, so let's move on to a slightly more complicated example. First of all, I'm going to select the lines of code here and comment them out like we learned how to do in the previous lesson. I'm going to paste in another example. Here we can see the use of the else keyword, and what we're able to do here is evaluate this expression. If it's true, we're going to execute the code block between lines 15 through 19. However, if this expression equates to false, we're going to execute the code block underneath the else statement in line 21. Messagebox.show you pick Conrad. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Oh, whoop, I'm sorry, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about here. Lines 15 through 19. Notice that I've embedded an if-then-else statement within the context of an if-then-else statement. So just be aware that you can embed your statements within other statements. So in this case, if this equates to true. So in other words, if the combo1 text is not equal to Conrad, then we're going to do another evaluation here. We're going to test this condition. If messagebox1.text equals Grant, then we're going to show this message box. Otherwise, we'll show this message box. I'm not sure who you picked. It wasn't Conrad and it wasn't Grant. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. First of all, we'll select Grant, and you'll note that we get the message box because it met both of the conditions. Then let's pick Conrad, and we're going to execute our else statement. And then we'll pick, say, Beth, and click the button, and it says, I'm not sure who you picked. And that's exactly what we would have expected these lines of code to accomplish. Let's comment out this line and move on from here. Next, we're going to talk about the select statement, and the select case statement is a lot like the if statement in so much that you can execute a block of code based on the evaluation of an expression. But the select statement is better for those situations where you could have a number of possible branches based on the expression. So let me demonstrate this by pasting in another example here. And you can see here that we have select case listbox1.selectedItem.toString. So we're going to determine which item was selected by the user in our list box. Then we have a series of case statements. If the case is foobar, then we're going to show this message box. If the selected item is BazQuark, then we'll show this message box. And if it's anything else, then we're going to show this message box. Okay? So notice here that we have this special property called selected item on our list box. This will return back to us which item was selected. And in a list box, multiple items can be selected, and we're going to demonstrate that a little bit later in this video. Then, because the selected item is returned as an object, and we haven't talked about objects yet, but it's the base class for all of our data types, then we need to convert it to a string so that we can do the evaluation correctly. Okay? So don't really think about that too much. Just take it at face value. We'll explain more about objects and casting objects, things of that nature later on. What we want to focus on is this select case, this expression that we're going to evaluate, and how it compares to the various cases that we have within the context of our select case and select keywords. So let's run the application. We'll start by selecting foobar. We'll go on to BazQuark, and then we'll pick gadgets. And notice that gadgets executed that final case else statement. You picked something else. Okay. So you can see here that we have two different branching statements, and the difference is that each one has its strengths. Two different tools that essentially do the same thing, but are used in two different scenarios. In software development, you're often going to find that there's more than one way to do something, and it's not a matter of the right way versus the wrong way in many cases, but which method is more expedient given the current circumstance. So in some cases, the if statement is more elegant, and in other cases, the select case statement is a more elegant way of solving a programming problem that you might face. Now, which one do you use? Well, that takes a little bit of experience, and it's going to take a little bit more time to get familiar with these, and you'll begin to see the situations where each can be used effectively. We're not going to focus on that right now. We're just going to introduce these concepts, and then later on we'll reinforce these as we move through the series of lessons. But for now, let's move on to arrays. And in order to really get the most out of recursion statements, we're going to need to talk about arrays. An array is a type of collection that allows you to group together a bunch of values that are related in some way. So for example, you could have a group of values that represent a price schedule, or a group of values that represent the times that the bus is going to arrive at a given stop on its route. Or you can have an array that includes all the test results for a given classroom. Or you can collect together all the values that are stored in a list box. So any grouping of values together can be treated like an array. So let me define an array and then talk about it a little bit more. You can think of an array as just a regular variable, or to extend the analogy that we've used previously, a regular bucket. But this particular bucket has more than one compartment. Now you can carry all the things in the bucket, all of the individual items in their respective compartments, by using the single handle on the bucket. Okay, so to apply that back to what we're talking about here, you can see that I'm dimensioning a new variable that has 3 compartments in it. This is 0 base, so think 0, 1, 2. Even though I've typed in the number 2 here, it's actually 3 items, 0, 1, and 2. So it has 3 compartments. But I'm going to be able to refer to each of those compartments by using the variable name myArray. And each of the items within the array are of type string. So that's one thing that you have to keep in mind whenever you're working with arrays, is that each element of the array has to be the same data type. In this case, each element of the array has to be of type string. So what we've done here is we've accessed each of the individual elements of the array by using an index, either 0, 1, or 2, in order to access the given compartment, or rather the given element of that array. And I have assigned the first element to Bob, the second element to Beth, and the third element to Conrad. In a like manner, I'm able to retrieve the values out of the array by using an index as well. Now in this case, what do you suppose will show up in the message box whenever we run our application? Let's go ahead and test it and find out. Okay, Conrad shows up, which is